Hi, welcome to my weekly wrap-up number 8. I am a Master of Forestry student at Northern Arizona University. This is my second semester, and I'm doing a weekly wrap-up of 3 classes: Forest Insects, Ecological Economics, and an independent study focusing on food security as one of the values that forests offer. So this week in the Forest Insects class, we looked at defoliators, which, as you might recall, is that they only eat the leaves or needles, and that is for the one stage of the caterpillar. Other stages can do other things. They can have mutualistic relationships, like with the monarch butterfly. The butterfly is one of the pollinators, but the caterpillar will almost completely defoliate the milkweed. And we looked at one of the major problems of the defoliators is the slow rate of growth, and so the net production is down. It is a huge issue in the agricultural community. 90% of entomologists actually study ag products, and my professor was like, I love bugs, I don't want to study how to kill them. So he moved into forest insects, and we do very little in the forest to do with defoliators. Mostly we let them go. We'll talk about one that we actually do something about. We looked at leafcutters, which are the ants, and they're a fascinating defoliator. They are mostly in the tropical areas. Well, they are only in tropical rainforest areas. They cut the leaves down, but they go to their host and they take like a 90-degree turn every couple of months or so. Every 90-degree turn, I'm not sure how often. But the reason they're doing that is because they don't want to completely defoliate their host. So they are getting the leaves based off of the fungus that is inside their nest, and the fungus is the one telling them, we want these leaves. So they get the leaves, they feed it to the fungus, and then the ants eat the fungus. And if the ants bring back a leaf that makes the fungus sick, then they won't go to that tree for months. They know which leaves that the fungus can handle and which ones they can't. And so that's a pretty interesting combination of mutualistic and symbiotic relationships. Then we looked, also this is an important thing to note. So we talked about how insects will taste like whatever they eat. Well, also keep in mind, if the insects are feeding off of a toxic plant, the insects will be toxic. So be careful of what you eat as to where the insects might have been feeding. Some of the benefits of leaf defoliators are that they do open up the canopy, particularly in the tropical rainforest. Light is the #1 limiting factor down there. Don't know if you've ever been into a deep rainforest, but it's dark down there. It's hard to take photographs. So the ants and any of the other defoliators are actually helping open up a light space for the plants to regenerate down on the bottom ground floor. Let's see, the one time that we really did a lot with a defoliator in the U.S. is the Western Spruce Budworm. Its name tells you a lot. Western, it is in the western U.S. Spruce, that is one of its main hosts. It also has a host of Douglas fir, true firs, and larch. Budworm, and it eats the bud. So it is a moth, has a really interesting life cycle. The adult will lay the eggs in the fall, and after about 10 days, the eggs will hatch, but the larvae stage creates this little casing around itself right at the tip, at the bud, and it waits until spring before it starts feeding, because that's when the new buds come out, and that's when they're most tender and apparently most delicious. So the budworm will then eat all the buds, and that is extremely devastating for the tree because that's its new growth, and particularly for any type of hardwood, that would be how it would get any of its food that year. For the conifers, the reason that it's destructive is they expect to keep those leaves 2 to 3 years, or in case of our little pinyon pine back here, these keep it for 9 years. So they invest a lot of resources into their needles. And if the budworm eats the buds and it can't make new needles, then it's relying on the old needles, which are not going to be as sufficient to create new growth nor give it as much food and energy as the plant needs. So to address it in the 70s, I believe he said, anyway, it was when DDT was used, and they took airplanes and they flew it across the forest and dumped DDT all over the place, trying to kill the budworm, which it did in some places, but as you might recall, DDT will also kill anything and everything else in the path, including us. So we don't do that anymore. One of the, you can identify that the silk, the budworm is on there is from top kill, so the needles and the leaves at the, it is all needles, the buds at the top of the tree will be a better place for the caterpillar to be. And so you can see top kill on those hardwoods, the conifers that I mentioned. And also it creates this kind of silk material, so the needles, when they're dropped from the tree, they will get caught, and you can see this needles caught throughout the tree, the brown needles. And so that's another indicator that the spruce budworm, western spruce budworm, might be eating your conifer. Let's see. Oh, this was another interesting thing. So because they're caterpillars, sometimes they just drop down to the ground, and then the multiple species, multiple age of the forest can actually aid in the budworm, that they can come up to the little seedlings, and then they can get to the saplings, and they can get all the way up to the mature trees. So one of the ways to manage for the western spruce budworm is to have an even age stand. But here's the trick. You might recall that the bark beetles really like even age stands, and the spruce budworm, because it will stress out the tree, makes it more susceptible to the bark beetles. So if you manage just for the spruce budworm, then you might have serious problems with the bark beetles. Fire is a good thing to use for both of those, so prescribed burns are a good way to manage the spruce budworm. Also, extreme temperatures could help, so maybe not driving your car as much would make a colder winter, and it would be good for your evergreens, your conifers. All right, let's see. Then we looked at the European Gypsy Moth, which was introduced in 1869 by an artist who wanted to create a more hardy silkworm. Got escaped. He recognized it was defoliating, called the authorities. They said, oh, we have all these invasive species all the time, no big deal. Well, wrong. It was a big deal, because the gypsy moth is very indiscriminate with its host. It can feed off of like 200 different species. So it's a big defoliator. It has a lot of research and a lot of management methods go into trying controlling it. There was one picture of like all these people up into the tree climbing around trying to take out all the gypsy moths. So it can be a real problem. The adult female, she has wings, but she has no muscles, so she can't fly. And so one of the good things is it was introduced in Boston. It has, the caterpillar goes around with a little silk string, and so it can be blown across through the forest, but the prevailing winds go this direction, so it has been able to keep it a little bit on the eastern side of the country, so that otherwise if it had been introduced in San Francisco, probably it would be all over the United States already, but at least it is a little bit more controlled. And so she likes to create her egg nest in dark crevices, and sometimes that's in cars. So that is one way that it's actually been able to progress westward across the United States. She puts down this sticky, gooey, hairy egg mass. And to be able to do that, it takes everything out of her, and by the time she's finished, she has no abdomen left. So she lays her eggs and dies. The reason she has that gooey mass is because it is a protectant against the parasitoid wasp. The wasp is the size of a period at the end of your sentence, and 12 font, and that little wasp, oh, what was so cool about it? It's looking for these volatile compounds. So if it was grown on an egg mass in an oak tree, once the wasp is ready to lay eggs, she is looking for an oak tree. She's smelling the host to find something that is like her parent space, where her home was. And for a while, they were breeding these wasps to try and attack the gypsy moth, but they were breeding them in agar in a laboratory, which, when you get outside in the outdoors, you can't smell anywhere that the agar is from the laboratory, so it was not doing well. And my professor's master's project was on this phenomena, and so they realized to be able to attack the gypsy moth that was affecting oaks, you had to grow the wasp in an oak, and then once you released it, the wasp, she would go after the oaks, and then she would find the gypsy moth that was in an oak. So that's a pretty cool specific thing about insects. It also reminded me of the loggerhead sea turtles, that she will come back and she looks for the same landscape in which she had to crawl down. All right. Lastly, the STS is slow the spread, and one of the reasons that is important for insects is that it gives the native species a chance to their predators a chance to catch up and figure out how to get them. So the chickadees had to learn how to get the gypsy moth caterpillar, because it's on that little silk thread and it will go down and up. It goes down during the day and back up at night to protect itself, and so the chickadees had to kind of learn to work with the silkworm going up and down. Okay, so the word for the day, I've talked about these conifers and the hardwoods, that the gypsy moth is going to the hardwoods and the spruce budworm is going to the conifers. So I want the word for the day is actually deciduous. Deciduous means that it drops all of its leaves, and that's like most hardwoods do that, which is more so the leaves. And those are hardwoods because the wood is harder in the angiosperms, which is really just that it has a flower, than in the conifers, which are mostly the gymnosperms, and those are with cones. And deciduous is as opposed to evergreen. And there can be a crossover between angiosperm and gymnosperm in both the deciduous and the evergreen. But generally, most angiosperms are deciduous, and most gymnosperms are mostly evergreens. Okay, hope that made sense. All right, so now we'll go on to ecological economics. We're still looking at systems thinking. This week we looked at socio-ecological systems. It has numerous other names. One of it is CHANS, coupled human and nature systems, where it's still a feedback system, trying to figure out where those missing links are, or where the weakened links have become, to be able to solve whatever issue we are looking at. We're trying to find the reasons behind the behavior. So most systems, you can actually narrow it down to one or two variables that have the characteristics that are really causing the problem that you are addressing. For our class this week, we divided up into breakout rooms. Our group looked at the Flagstaff Water Protection Project, and so we had to use the 6-step process. One is you draw a diagram and you identify your 4 core subsystems, and that is a governance unit, a resource units, resource system, and the actors. So for ours, we did our whole system was the watershed, and then we had the governance, which was a little tricky because of the watershed. We had city, we had federal with the federal lands, and then we also had some private governance in there with the tree trimmers that were going in. We were looking at interactions and outcomes, and that was sort of straightforward for us, but then when we had to try and figure out the difference between the impacts and the feedbacks, that got a little tricky. The drivers of it for us was pretty easy. There was a wildfire followed directly by a rain out here in Flagstaff, and it was a horrible, devastating, massive flood. So that was really one of the drivers. But then the second phase, you have to look at identify the indicators, and those are things that you can measure, and they can also be ranked. We looked at, like, after you do a thinning, which is one of the ways that would help the watershed to not have such a horrible flood, because you wouldn't have such a bad fire, then what do people think about a thinned out forest? What's the visual impact of that? Also smoke, since prescribed fire is another way to keep the fires from getting so massive. What happens with the smoke? Is that an indicator, or is that another subsystem? Then you need to look at data sources where you can actually find various things to back up these concepts you've come up with. The fourth one is expected trends and outcomes. For us, we looked at potentially like how much risk was reduced by doing the thinnings and the prescribed fires. Oh, I'm going to have to look. Oh, yeah. Did you not have to rebuild houses because they weren't burnt down? How much insurance was saved? So that's some of the things that you would want to be able to look as your trends and outcomes. We looked at the missing links. That's the fifth section of it, the missing feedback links. And we decided assessment was one of them. We didn't find any way where they had gone back and assessed. Yes, we do know the risk that was reduced. Also, the budget was not really prepared well because they have now run out of money. And so that is one of the missing. That's a weakened link that has happened. Also, the utilization option. If we're thinning these trees, what can we do with the timber that is being taken out of the land instead of piling it up and waiting for another fire to happen, which is what came along. So that was not a really good thing either. That was a bad one. And one of the sixth step is any kind of proposal to initiate or improve. And we looked at the WUI, wilderness, urban interface, and how people are building their houses too close, and is there a method to establish a safer buffer zone between the wild areas and the homes. Then one of the articles that we read was really interesting and part of the thing I found applicable was cultural identities and how that affects forests. Do we just go out into the woods? Do we want to take things from it? Do we care for them? Do we help support the management for that? Or do we go to the mountains just to hike and we don't recognize the full interaction of a forest? So the word for ecological economics is forest. And that is a very simple definition. It is a large area covered primarily by trees and undergrowth. Now, when you hear the word forest, what comes to your mind? If you are in the Pacific Northwest, it could be a very dense conifer area that is mostly evergreen all year. If you are in Louisiana, you might need to take a machete and whack a step, whack before another step. Out here, as you can see, it's more open, but we have a lot of trees. The undergrowth is like, I don't know, maybe not even above my above my knee. So what does the word forest bring to mind to you? All right, lastly, am I doing on time? This is going to go long. All right, the last one is independence class, and I'm still looking at pinyon pine to see how that affects food security. And so my primary area is in the Southwest, and specifically in the Navajo Nation. And so I read about food insecurity for the Navajo Nation, and it was devastating to learn about what's going on. They have a 82.5% obesity rate. That is up from about 30 years ago, where it was more like in the 50%. So we discussed what were some of the drivers of that change. Why did it increase? Why has Cheetos and Coca-Cola become like a new normal? Why has that become acceptable as a normal way to eat? And what is driving that? And then additionally recognizing that the modern amenities are not the sole problem, because the obesity rate throughout the rest of the United States is between 40 and 45%. So why is it so much higher on the Navajo Nation? One of the things is the nation is about the size of West Virginia, but they have 13 grocery stores. They have a lot of convenience stores and a lot of little markets like that. Which, if you've ever stopped at a gas station to get any food, you're not going to get a whole lot of something nutritious. I've been looking at the different footprints that people have come up with for the food system, and it's pretty interesting on the production level of it and the distribution of it. What I haven't seen is marketing. Advertising is a $7.4 trillion industry in the United States, so it works. So even if you do go into a little market, it's probably more fun to buy like the Cheeto dude than it is to get an apple with no marketing involved with it at all. So how are all of those things interacting to create this disenfranchisement with their historical health? And what are some of the major drivers that I can identify with that? I need to keep in mind the three concepts of economics, ecological issues, and social issues to really help shift the trajectory of where that group of people are, but also in general where our whole earthly system is headed with our actions. And I need to figure out where this little pinyon pine will have a role in that, and where this little scientist will have a role in that, and how we can each individually help shift that car from heading over to the cliff that it is currently heading down towards with our foot on the pedal. So we need to change that, and I want to research how to do that in the least destructive way, least destructive for people as well as for the planet. So the word for the independent study is a term. It is food security, and is simply defined as reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. And I would like for each of us to consider where we fit in that, and maybe also think about where our neighbors fit in with food security versus low, high, or middle food insecurity. Our poem for today is by Karen Szklany, Szklany. The poem's name is Wisdom Seat, and it is called, that's what it's called. It is the haiku, sitting with trees, listening to their wisdom. Breezes stir my soul. So I hope you will get outside, listen to some trees, say hello. It's a good place to start a relationship with trees in order to find out their values so that we can all manage them better and probably all be happier. We'll be healthier anyway if we pay attention to our trees. Hope you have a great week. Ciao, ciao, ciao.